Thank you so much for the organizing committee for accepting the proposal and for giving me the chance to participate in this very significant conference. As far as I'm concerned, my topic is about the discourse of alternative modernities. Sorry? No? The discourse of alternative modernities in contemporary Moroccan philosophical thought, and most particularly on Taha Abdurrahman. As you know, the Moroccan as well as the Arab philosophical thought is imbued by a lot of voices problematizing the notion of modernity and our relationship with the West, and simultaneously with tradition. And therefore, what one can see is a diverging set of voices that can be summarized into two categories. One, calling for us to break up definitely with the past and embrace definitely the West and its modernity, and others calling for a rejection of this secular atheist West and embracing tradition because it's our solace. Through my presentation, I will abide by the following outline. I will give an introduction and then talk about Abdurrahman's critique of reason, unitary thought, and le fait accompli, and then the spirit of modernity versus the reality of modernity, and then the Islamic practice of the principle of majority. During the last 2 centuries, the Western conceptualization of modernity has been the predominant framework for grasping political, economic, industrial, and cultural change in non-Western societies. Without alteration whatsoever, a number of thinkers and historians began to embrace enthusiastically this project and stood in defense of it. Increasingly, however, many social scientists and thinkers from the outside of the Western world have begun by providing the notion of alternative modernities, which, by the way, is developed by names like Souhil Alouache, to rethink and challenge the claimed universality of the West's account on modernity. In fact, the idea of alternative or multiple modernities shows that modernity is present in today's debates everywhere. Modernity, therefore, is unavoidable. The prominent intellectual figure and philosopher Taha Abdurrahman has problematized the question of modernity and modernization using different intellectual perspectives, different from the two dichotomous stances dominating the Muslim thought, that is to say, the polarized positions ranging from the Marxist historicist position led by the Moroccan philosopher Ismail with his call for a radical and decisive epistemological break, which is borrowed from physics. That is, in order for a certain science or a certain area of research to grow on, there must be an epistemic break or rupture with the sciences that precede it. And so it is borrowed by, I think, Al-Jadari in order to use it in fields of thought and philosophy. And so, with his call for a radical and decisive epistemological break with the past. And on the other hand, the Salafist position that sticks romantically to the past and denounces anything not Muslim. With his focus on logic, the philosophy of language, and the philosophy of morality, Abdurrahman is considered one of the leading intellectuals in the Islamic world. He engages with the metaphysical and philosophical questions of our time, trying to set a foundation for a profound reading of tradition, critically thinking of the Torah and modernity. In an interview with Jadaliya, Columbia University professor Souhil Alouache states that the other trend or camp in modern Islamic thought is a thin one and is emerging slowly but hopefully steadily and surely. That is the Islamic critical school, superheated by the Moroccan language, logic, and moral philosopher Taha Abdurrahman, who has not succumbed to the Enlightenment modes of thought. His critical constructive approach signals promising, innovating beginning from which a new path of thinking and re-articulation can begin. Taha defends religion and morality, along with reason and rational thinking. He asks why should it be acceptable for modernists to critique religion through the secular, but not for the secular to be critiqued through religion. Abdurrahman takes it as his task to critique Western modernity through the lenses of the ethics, lamenting the state of affairs in contemporary Islamic thought, where it is as if some Muslims measure the extent of their modernization with the extent to which they cut themselves from tradition, history, institutions. In a sense, Taha would tell us that by doing so, they are merely imitating the modernity of others. Abdurrahman urges us to appeal to a more solid foundation and derive ethics and morals from our tradition. He points then that theistic religion, or he calls us to derive ethics and morals from what he points to as theistic religion. He argues that reason in the West has been elevated so much so that it were as if Westerners were the exclusive bearers of rationality, or at least more rational than their counterparts in non-Western societies. Abdurrahman points out at how attempts at an Islamic revival for the last century and half have concentrated upon the idea of rationality. Yet, they have been lacking in interrogating and examining the underlying principles of such notions. He goes on further to say that such attempts are actually devoid of the spirit of modernity, the title of one of his books, for they are a mere exercise in imitation rather than a source of creative, critical engagement with modernity, as he calls it. Abdurrahman considers logic as the basis of forming cognitive theories. Logic, therefore, is to be defended, because examining and problematizing the tools and the frameworks within which a given idea, a set of thoughts emerge, is more important than looking into the content, the ideas themselves. This is why he decries the excessive obsession of Moroccan Arab philosophical thought with content. Inevitably, Abdurrahman's attitude towards Western modernity is that of refusal. His attitude toward tradition is that it is a historical fact. One cannot do away with it by claiming an epistemological rupture. Abdurrahman does not, like many traditionalists also, hail the Turath ideologically or romantically, but he invites us to see tradition in a holistic, comprehensive manner, instead of essentialism. Now I would like to move to Abdurrahman's critique of reason, unitary thought, le fait accompli. To say this first, for Abdurrahman, in order to be modern in our own way, based on what he calls the pragmatic context, الحقل التداولي, we have to be very critical of a lot of notions that are circulating while talking about modernity and defending it. One of them is reason, the concept of reason. What do we mean by reason? We read for Kant, we read for Westerners in general, and we get the meaning of reason. But what is really reason? Is there only one definition of reason? And then we have what he calls le fait accompli and unitary thought. To establish the ground for his theory, Abdurrahman critiques a set of notions and concepts, among which is the notion of reason. For Taha, reason is not self-sufficient in sense, like in the Aristotelian definition of it. And he does not define man as a rational creature, rather he defines man as a moral being. What defines man in philosophy is the mind, because it differentiates us from other species. But in, for example, Ruh Din, the spirit of religion, he says that we can define man too, by the same logic, as a moral being, because he is the only creature on this earth who has a moral edge that differentiates him or her from the other species. So it is not, reason is not the only distinguishing feature man possesses. For Taha, reason is not a self-sufficient sense, and he does not define man as a rational creature, rather he defines man as a moral being. The difference between man and the rest of the species is not rationality, but morality. For Aristotle, reason is a universal and shared quality among mankind. Aristotle tells us that reason is an intrinsic character of man, and therefore it is universal, it is common between all people, all nations, all societies. Taha Abdurrahman rejects this. For Aristotle, reason is a universal and shared quality among mankind. It is in a sense, independent and intrinsic to humans, self-sufficient and inclusive. In other words, it is in no need for external, especially metaphysical influences. Hence, it is capable of cultivating knowledge, and therefore the idea that the mind is universal or total is that it applies to everybody, everywhere. The claim for Taha has been very dominant in Muslim intellectual scene. The claim that Western modernity is universal and global due to the universality of reason is an invalid argument in his opinion. In fact, Western modernity is a constructed reality. It is not universally applicable because it claims that it is based on reason, and because reason is not universal, therefore this modernity that is based on this reason is not universal too. Abdurrahman insists on the right of intellectual and philosophical difference as a right to liberation for Muslim scholars from blind imitation of the Western secular intellectual tradition. He calls for a modernity with a moral orientation alternative. With a moral orientation alternative to the modernity known in the West with a material orientation. The opinion I adopt, Taha says, is that modernity is multi-potential, not as entrenched in people's minds one possibility. The evidence shows that the Western modernist scene is not homogeneous, but rather diverse and heterogeneous, so much so that it is possible to speak of various modernities instead of one modernity. Also, Abdurrahman talks about what is called le fait accompli, al-amr al-waqi'. So modernity is a fact there, and you have to accept it by hook or by crook. It is inevitable, as Moulay would say. We are bound to be modern, and world civilizations have culminated in Europe as they did in Muslim past once, and therefore we have to embrace this modernity because it is universal. Le fait accompli, which is the second obstacle for Taha Abdurrahman, is the economic political hegemony that provides the material support for the universalization of Western secular thought that he believes seeks to negate intellectual difference. Abdurrahman considers le fait accompli, which is political in a sense, to be detrimental to philosophy than cultural hegemony. Because when you tell me that it is le fait accompli and you have to accept it at face value, you deny my right to be philosophically and intellectually different. It goes against philosophy, Taha Abdurrahman would say. Because while he is talking or examining the topic, he emphasizes a lot of his analysis on philosophy, on logic, on the systematic thinking, how a certain idea or argument is generated. So when you tell me that modernity is universal, and it is there and should be accepted, you are in a way telling me to put off my mind and to accept it as it is. He tells you no. We have to question it, and we have to question this le fait accompli. When you tell me le fait accompli, it means that it is there, and it is the thing which must be there, and therefore it cannot be changed. So he tells you that this is against philosophy. Given that reason is not static, but fluid and constantly changing, there is not just one kind of rationality. Rationalities for Abdurrahman are contextual and historical, and constructed too. Given that reason is not static, but fluid and constantly changing, there is not just one kind of rationality, advances Abdurrahman, but different rationalities. The idea of universal thought and le fait accompli must be overcome, since they undermine Arab philosophy and make it a follower of debates elsewhere. Critiquing these two notions paves the way to gaining our autonomy. Abdurrahman's fundamental point is that the true dialogue can take place only when the natural right to express intellectual difference and freedom is granted and practiced. Abdurrahman also, in his book Discourse of Modernity, Ruh al-Hadatha, invites us to distinguish between two things. Between the spirit of modernity, which is the essence, the philosophical meaning of it, and the reality of modernity as a manifestation. Because there is a difference between discourse, as a set of ideas, as a set of points made by philosophers and so on, and the materialization, the historical manifestation of these, the practice of these ideas. So he tells us that modernity is okay. So he tells us that modernity is based on a set of notions, like the principle of majority, that which is also defined as maturity, and which, by the way, he benefited from Immanuel Kant when he says enlightenment, which is a basis for modernity, is man's release from his self-incurred tutelage. Tutelage is man's inability to make use of his understanding without direction from another. Self-incurred is this tutelage when its cause lies not in lack of reason, but in lack of resolution and courage to use it without direction from another. Dare to think. That is the motto of enlightenment. So Abdurrahman tells us that modernity as a philosophy, as a set of ideas, is based on three major principles. The principle of majority, which is based on autonomy and creativity. For one to be mature, intellectually and philosophically independent, one should be independent and creative at the same time. Also, the second principle is criticism. And criticism is based on differentiation and rationalization. Criticism for Taha is a human asset that everybody has the right. That's why he called two of his books the Muslim right to philosophical difference and the Arab right to intellectual difference. So he, in a way, calls us to be philosophically, intellectually different from the West, because the context, the historical, ideological, political context where this Western modernity emerged is totally different from ours. Do I have some time? No? 1 minute, okay. So, what I would like to tell you is this. Taha Abdurrahman's thought is a very sophisticated and complicated one. To read it in Arabic and then to translate it into English has been a very demanding and challenging task for me. But the main point he defends is this. Modernity in the West is a historical one. It is one possibility of implementing the essence of modernity. That is to say, talking of an Islamic modernity is also possible, as professors at first have suggested. Modernity in Malaysia has been taking a different shape. In Japan too. And modernity in America and Europe are totally different at certain senses. So he calls for the Islamic and the Arab right to philosophize and to construct a modernity that is